You won't believe how easily a person can vanish. One moment they exist, the next moment they are gone, as if they were never here at all. No body, no clue, no answer. History has forgotten their faces, but the silence they left behind still screams. Some walked into the light and never came back. Some were taken by the dark. Some simply stopped existing, and the world moved on without them. On echoed reality, nothing is ignored, and no silence is left unexplored. We ask the questions no one dares to ask. We search for the names that time erased. We listen to the echoes of people who disappeared without a trace. But here is what haunts us most. If they vanished so completely, how do we know they were ever real at all? The world turns and people live and people die, and most of them leave something behind. A grave with their name carved into stone, a record in a book somewhere, a memory passed down through generations. But some people leave nothing at all. They step into a moment, and that moment closes behind them like water over a stone, and there is no ripple, no trace, no proof they were ever there except for the empty space they left behind and the people who will spend the rest of their lives asking where they went. This is not a story about people who ran away or people who were found years later living quiet lives in distant towns. This is a story about the ones who vanished so completely that the world has been searching for them ever since. And the world is still searching, still asking, still hoping that somewhere in the silence there is an answer. But the silence does not break, and the answer does not come, and all we have left are the questions that echo through time, questions that grow louder the longer they go unanswered, questions that haunt us because they remind us how fragile we are, how easily we can be erased, how quickly the world can swallow us whole. On the morning of July 2nd, 1937, a woman sat in the cockpit of an airplane somewhere over the Pacific Ocean. The sun was rising ahead of her, the ocean stretched in every direction like a sheet of glass, endless and blue and empty. Her name was Amelia Earhart, and she was the most famous pilot in the world, the first woman to fly alone across the Atlantic Ocean, the woman who had proven that courage had no gender, that the sky belonged to anyone brave enough to reach for it. And now she was trying to do something no one had ever done. She was trying to fly around the entire world, following the equator, a journey of 29,000 miles. And she was almost finished, just 7,000 miles left, just a few more stops across the Pacific, and she would be home, and she would be a legend forever. She had taken off hours earlier from Leh in New Guinea, her navigator, Fred Noonan, sitting beside her with his maps and instruments. Their destination was a tiny island called Howland Island, so small it was barely a dot on the map, just 2 miles long and half a mile wide, a strip of coral and sand in the middle of an ocean so vast it could swallow 1,000 islands and never notice. But Howland Island was important because it had a runway and it had fuel, and it was exactly where Amelia needed to be. The United States Coast Guard had positioned a ship near the island, the Itasca. Its job was to send radio signals to guide Amelia in, to be her beacon in all that emptiness. And everything seemed fine at first. The weather was clear, the plane was flying well. Amelia's voice came through the radio at 7:42 in the morning. She said they must be close. She said they were looking for the island, but could not see it. The crew on the Itasca tried to respond. They sent signals. They called her name, but she did not seem to hear them clearly. The radio was crackling, the signal was weak, and Amelia's voice was starting to sound worried. At 8:43, her voice came through again. sharper now, more urgent. She said they were flying on a line, north and south, searching, trying to spot the island. She gave their position. She asked the Itasca to send signals on a certain frequency, but the signals were not connecting. Something was wrong with the radio or the equipment or the distance, and the men on the ship could hear the tension in her voice. They could hear that she was worried, that something was not going according to plan. And then at 8:45, her last message came through. Her voice was calm, but there was an edge to it. She said they were running low on fuel. She repeated their position, and then the radio went silent. And it has been silent ever since. 70 years of silence, 70 years of questions, 70 years of searching. The Itasca waited and called her name over and over. They scanned the horizon, they listened for the sound of engines, but there was nothing, just the wind and the waves and the terrible emptiness of the ocean. And when it became clear that something was very wrong, when the hours passed and Amelia did not arrive, the United States Coast Guard launched the largest air and sea search in history up to that time. Ships and planes covered more than 250,000 square miles of ocean. They searched for 17 days. They looked at every island, every reef, every possible place a plane could land or crash. They flew low over the water, looking for wreckage, for oil slicks, for life rafts, for any sign at all. But the ocean gave them nothing. It kept its secret, and after 17 days, the search was called off, and Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan were declared lost at sea. But declaring someone lost is not the same as knowing what happened, and the families wanted to know. The world wanted to know. How could the most famous pilot in the world just disappear? How could a plane vanish in clear weather with a ship waiting nearby? How could there be no wreckage, no debris, no trace? And so the theories began. Some people said the plane ran out of fuel and crashed into the ocean and sank into water so deep that no one would ever find it. The Pacific Ocean has trenches that go down 5 miles, deeper than Mount Everest is tall, and a plane could fall into that darkness and be crushed by the pressure and lost forever. Other people said Amelia and Fred might have landed on a remote island, that they survived the landing but died waiting for rescue, that they sent radio signals no one heard, that they built fires no one saw, that they died of thirst or hunger or injury on some tiny strip of land that the searchers missed. And there were stranger theories too. Whispers that Amelia had been on a secret spy mission for the United States government, that she had been captured by the Japanese military who controlled many of the islands in that part of the Pacific, that she had been taken prisoner, questioned, maybe even killed. But none of these theories had proof. They were just guesses, just attempts to fill the terrible silence with something, anything, because silence is unbearable. Over the decades, searchers have gone back to the Pacific again and again. They have used new technology, sonar, underwater robots, satellites. They have searched islands that were not searched thoroughly in 1937. They have found things, pieces of metal that might be from a plane, bones that might be human, artifacts that might have belonged to a castaway. On an island called Nikumoro Moro, they found a shoe that could have been a woman's size. They found a piece of glass from a jar of face cream that was the same brand Amelia used. They found evidence that someone had camped there, that someone had tried to catch fish and collect rainwater. But none of it is certain. None of it is proof. The metal could be from any plane. The bones could be from anyone. The artifacts could have washed up from anywhere. And so the mystery remains. Amelia Earhart took off into a clear sky on a July morning and never came back. Somewhere in the vast Pacific there is an answer, a place where the plane hit the water, or a beach where she took her last breath. But the ocean is enormous, and the ocean does not give up its dead easily. And after more than 80 years, we are still searching, still wondering, still hoping that one day the silence will break and we will finally know what happened in those last hours, what Amelia saw, what she felt, whether she knew she was going to die, or whether it happened so fast there was no time for fear. But until that day comes, if it ever comes, she remains lost, a ghost in the sky, a name without an ending. The cold can kill you in ways you do not expect. It does not happen all at once like drowning or falling. It happens slowly, degree by degree. First your fingers stop working, and then your thoughts become confused, and then you stop feeling the cold at all, and that is when you are closest to death. And in the frozen wilderness of the Arctic Ocean, where the sun disappears for months at a time and the ice stretches forever in every direction, cold is not the only enemy. There is also hunger, there is exhaustion, there is the terrible crushing weight of knowing you are alone in a place that wants you dead. And in the spring of 1845, 129 men sailed into that frozen world, and none of them ever came back. They left from England on 2 ships, the HMS Erebus and the HMS Terror, strong ships reinforced with iron to withstand the crushing ice, ships that had already survived expeditions to Antarctica. And the men aboard them were experienced sailors, officers, scientists. They were well fed and well equipped, and led by a man named Sir John Franklin, who was 59 years old and who had explored the Arctic before, and who had been given a mission by the British Royal Navy. Find the Northwest Passage. Find a navigable route through the Arctic that would connect the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean, a route that would change trade forever, that would make England even more powerful than it already was. And so they sailed north with confidence, with supplies enough for 3 years, with canned food and warm clothing and coal to heat the ships, and scientific instruments to map the passage. And for a while, everything seemed to be going according to plan. Other ships saw them that summer in Baffin Bay off the coast of Greenland. The crews were healthy, the ships were intact, the men waved and shouted greetings, and then they sailed further north into the ice, and after that, no one ever saw them again. The Arctic swallowed them, the ice closed around them, and the world heard nothing. 1 year passed and there was no word. 2 years passed and families began to worry. 3 years passed and the British government began to panic. Where were the ships? Where were the men? What had happened? And so the searches began. Dozens of search expeditions over the next decade, ships and sledges and men on foot, all of them heading into the Arctic looking for any trace of the Franklin expedition. And the Arctic is a cruel place to search. The ice shifts and cracks. The cold is so intense it can freeze exposed skin in minutes. The storms are blinding. The darkness in winter is absolute, and many of the searchers almost died themselves. But they kept looking because 129 men do not just disappear. There has to be something, some clue, some sign. In 1850, searchers found 3 graves on a tiny island called Beechy Island, graves marked with wooden headboards. The names were John Torrington, John Hartnell, and William Braine, sailors from the Franklin expedition who had died in the first winter of 1846, dead from illness or accident, buried in the frozen ground. But there were only 3 graves. Where were the other 126 men? Where were the ships? And the searchers kept looking, spreading out across the Arctic, asking the Inuit people who lived there if they had seen anything. And the Inuit had stories. They said they had seen white men a few years before, men who were sick and starving, men pulling boats across the ice, trying to walk south, trying to reach safety. The Inuit said the men looked like ghosts, thin and pale and dying. They said they had found bodies scattered across the islands, bodies frozen in the ice or lying in boats or collapsed on the snow. They said there were dozens of bodies, but the searchers did not find them right away. The Arctic is vast. Distances are deceiving. A body can be 10 feet away and invisible in the snow. In 1859, a search party found something more. On King William Island, they found a pile of stones, and inside the pile was a metal cylinder, and inside the cylinder was a note, written by the officers of the Franklin expedition. The note was actually two notes. The first one was dated May 1847. It said the ships were trapped in ice. It said they had wintered twice in the ice. It said all was well. But then there was a second note written in the margins dated April 1848, and this note told a different story. It said Sir John Franklin had died in June 1847. It said 9 officers and 15 men were dead. It said the ships were still trapped and were being abandoned. It said the remaining 105 men were going to try to walk south toward a place called Back's Fish River, where they hoped to find food and safety. The note was signed by the new leader, Captain Crozier, and that was the last anyone heard from the Franklin expedition. 105 men walking south across the ice, pulling lifeboats on sledges, carrying whatever supplies they could, and none of them made it. None of them reached safety. They died along the way, one by one, scattered across hundreds of miles of frozen wasteland. Over the next 150 years, more remains were found, skeletons on beaches, bones inside a boat, artifacts like spoons and buttons and pieces of clothing, and the remains told a terrible story. Some of the bones had marks on them, cut marks, marks that suggested the men had been so desperate in their final days that they had resorted to the unthinkable, that they had consumed the flesh of their dead companions just to survive a little longer. And this was shocking to the people back in England. The idea that British naval officers, men of honor and discipline, could be driven to such desperation was almost too horrible to believe. But the evidence was there, in the bones, in the cut marks, in the stories the Inuit told of finding bodies that had been disturbed. And so the question became not just what happened, but why? Why did the ships get trapped? Why did the men die? They had enough supplies, they had experience. What went wrong? Modern analysis has given us some answers, but not all of them. Scientists have examined the bodies that were preserved in the ice. They have tested the bones and the hair and the tissue, and they found high levels of lead. The canned food that was supposed to sustain the men for 3 years had been sealed with lead solder, and over time the lead leached into the food and poisoned the men. Lead poisoning causes confusion, aggression, weakness. It clouds your judgment. It makes you sick. And the men were already dealing with cold and hunger and exhaustion, and the lead made everything worse. But lead poisoning alone does not explain everything. It does not explain why the officers decided to abandon the ships and walk south. It does not explain why they didn't wait for the ice to break up in the spring. And some historians think the men made a fatal mistake. They think the officers panicked. They think the lead poisoning affected their decision-making. They think that if the men had stayed with the ships, they might have survived longer, but instead they walked into the wilderness, and the wilderness killed them. In 2014, searchers using sonar finally found the Erebus sitting on the bottom of the ocean near King William Island, remarkably well preserved. The deck was still intact, the wheel was still there, and 2 years later they found the Terror, also intact, resting in a bay. And these discoveries answered one question: we finally knew where the ships ended up, but they raised more questions too. Why are the ships so far apart? Why are they in such good condition if the men abandoned them in desperation? What happened after the men left? And the ships cannot tell us. They are silent. They are just metal and wood and artifacts. And so the Franklin expedition remains one of the greatest mysteries of exploration. 129 men sailed into the ice, and the ice kept them. Some of their bodies have been found, some of their belongings have been found, but their story is still incomplete. We do not know what they felt in those final days. We do not know what they saw. We do not know if they stayed together or scattered, if they helped each other or fought each other, if they had hope until the end, or if hope died long before they did. And we will never know, because the men who could tell us are dead, and the ice has kept their secrets. Sometimes a person does not need to travel to a remote place to disappear. Sometimes they vanish from somewhere familiar, somewhere they have been 100 times before, somewhere that should be safe. And when that happens, the mystery becomes even more disturbing, because it means that nowhere is truly safe, that you can be in a place you know and still be erased. And on December 17, 1967, the Prime Minister of Australia went for a swim at a beach he had visited many times, and he never came out of the water. His name was Harold Holt, and he was 59 years old, a politician who had risen to the highest office in the country, a man who loved the ocean, who swam almost every day, who knew the beaches near his home, who was confident in the water. And on that Sunday morning, he drove to Cheviot Beach on the Mornington Peninsula with some friends. The weather was warm, it was summer in Australia, the sun was bright, but the ocean was rough. The waves were high, the current was strong. His friends looked at the water and said it was not a good day to swim. They said they should go somewhere calmer. But Harold Holt disagreed. He said he knew this beach. He had swum here many times. He would be fine. And so he walked down to the water in his swimming trunks, and he waded in, and he swam out past the breaking waves, and his friends watched from the shore. At first, everything seemed normal. Harold was a strong swimmer. He moved easily through the water. But then the current grabbed him. The ocean changed. The waves grew higher, and Harold was suddenly struggling. His friends could see him being pulled out to sea. They shouted his name. They ran to the water's edge. One of them tried to swim out to him, but the current was too strong, and he had to turn back. And within seconds, Harold Holt disappeared beneath the waves. One moment he was there, visible, fighting the water, and the next moment he was gone, pulled under, swept away, vanished. The alarm was raised immediately. People on the beach called for help. Lifeguards arrived. Police arrived. Helicopters were scrambled. Boats were launched. Divers went into the water. And the search grew and grew. The Royal Australian Navy sent ships. The Army sent personnel. Hundreds of people combed the coastline. The search covered miles of ocean and beach. They used underwater cameras. They used sonar. They searched for days, and they found nothing. No body, no clothing, no evidence at all. The Prime Minister of Australia had vanished into the ocean right in front of witnesses, right near the shore, and the ocean refused to give him back. The country was stunned. How could this happen? How could a man in his position just disappear? And because Harold Holt was a political figure, because he had power and connections and enemies, the conspiracy theories came fast. Some people said he had faked his death, that he had planned his disappearance and swum to a waiting submarine. Some said he had been a spy for China and had defected, that the swim was a cover story, that he was living in Beijing under a new name. Others said he had been assassinated, that foreign agents had grabbed him in the water, that his body had been taken and disposed of, and the theories grew wilder and wilder, but none of them had any evidence. They were just stories people told because the truth was too simple and too terrible. The truth was that the ocean does not care who you are. It does not care if you are a prime minister or a fisherman. When the water wants to take you, it takes you. And Cheviot Beach was known to be dangerous. The current there was notorious. Experienced locals avoided it, and Harold Holt had made a mistake. He had overestimated his strength and underestimated the power of the ocean, and the ocean had won. But still the question remained. Where was his body? How could there be no trace? Bodies usually wash up after drowning. They float. They are pushed by currents. They end up on beaches or caught in rocks. But Harold Holt's body never appeared. Not on the day of the drowning, not in the weeks after, not in the months that followed. Not ever. And so the mystery lingered. Some people said the body was taken by sharks, that it was consumed so completely there was nothing left. Others said the currents had carried it out to deep water, that it had sunk and become trapped on the ocean floor. But without a body, there could be no certainty, no closure. And so Harold Holt exists in a strange state, officially dead, memorialized with a plaque at the beach, but also somehow unresolved. A man who walked into the water and did not walk out. A leader who vanished in the middle of his term, and Australia had to move on without him. A new prime minister was appointed. Life continued, but the question never went away. Where is Harold Holt? Is he still out there somewhere in the deep water off the coast, or has the ocean erased him so completely that there is nothing left at all? Children are not supposed to disappear. We tell ourselves that society will protect them, that someone will notice, that there are systems in place to keep them safe. But sometimes those systems fail. Sometimes a child walks out of sight for just a moment, and when we look back, they are gone. And the horror of it is almost too much to bear, because children are innocent. They have done nothing to deserve such a fate, and yet they vanish anyway. And one of the most painful disappearances in history happened on a winter night in 1977 when a 13-year-old girl was walking home from school in Japan, and she never arrived. Her name was Megumi Yokota, and she lived in the city of Niigata on the coast of the Sea of Japan. She was a normal girl, a good student. She played badminton. She had friends. She walked the same route home every day, a route that was safe and familiar, just a few blocks from school to her house. And on November 15th, she stayed late for badminton practice. The sun was setting when she left school. The air was cold. Winter was coming. She walked with friends for part of the way, and then they said goodbye, and she kept walking alone. Just a few more blocks, just a few more minutes. Her mother was home waiting. Dinner was ready. Megumi should have been there by 6 o'clock, but 6 o'clock came and went, and she did not arrive. Her mother looked out the window. She waited a few more minutes. Maybe Megumi had stopped to talk to a friend. Maybe she had stayed late at school. But by 6:30, her mother was worried. By 7 o'clock, she was panicking. She went outside calling Megumi's name. She walked the route to school looking for her daughter. Neighbors joined the search. They called the police, and the police came and searched the neighborhood. They questioned people. They looked in yards and parks and alleys, and they found nothing. No sign of Megumi, no clue about where she had gone. It was as if she had stepped into the air and vanished. The search expanded. Hundreds of volunteers combed the area. Police officers went door to door. They checked the river. They checked abandoned buildings. They interviewed everyone who lived near the route Megumi walked. And no one had seen anything. No one had heard anything. There had been no scream, no struggle, no car speeding away. Just a girl walking home, and then nothing. And Megumi's parents were destroyed. They could not understand how their daughter could just disappear. She was responsible. She was careful. She knew the way home. And they begged for information. They put up posters with Megumi's picture. They went on television pleading for anyone who knew anything to come forward. But no one came forward. There was no ransom demand, no contact from anyone. Just silence. The terrible silence of not knowing. Days became weeks, weeks became months. Megumi's parents refused to give up. They kept searching, they kept hoping. But as time passed, hope became harder to hold on to, and the case went cold. Megumi Yokota was listed as a missing person, one of thousands of people who disappear in Japan every year, most of whom are never found. And her parents tried to move on. But how do you move on from something like that? How do you live with the not knowing? And so they did not move on. They kept Megumi's room exactly as it was. They kept her books and her clothes and her badminton racket. They waited for her to come home. And the years passed. 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. And then in the late 1990s, something impossible happened. Something that should have brought answers, but only brought more pain. The government of North Korea, the secretive dictatorship on the other side of the Sea of Japan, made an announcement. They admitted that they had kidnapped Japanese citizens in the 1970s and 80s. They said they had sent agents to Japan, agents who grabbed people off the streets and put them on boats and took them to North Korea, where they were used as teachers, forced to teach North Korean spies how to speak Japanese, how to act Japanese, how to pretend to be Japanese. And one of the people they admitted to kidnapping was Megumi Yokota. They said their agents had grabbed her near the beach on the night she disappeared, that she was 13 years old, that she had been alone, that they had put a bag over her head and carried her to a boat and taken her across the Sea of Japan to North Korea, and she had lived there for years, a prisoner in a foreign country, unable to contact her family, unable to go home. And North Korea said she had eventually married another Japanese abductee, that she had a daughter, that she had lived in North Korea until 1994 when she died. They said she had killed herself, that she had suffered from depression, that she was buried in North Korea. Megumi's parents were devastated. They had spent decades wondering if their daughter was alive, hoping she would come home, and now they were being told she had been alive all those years just across the sea, so close and yet completely unreachable, and now she was dead. But they did not believe North Korea's story. They did not believe she had killed herself. North Korea had lied about so many things. Why should this be different? And they demanded proof. They demanded to see her remains. And North Korea sent them bones. Bones they said were Megumi's. But when the bones were tested, the DNA did not match. The bones were not Megumi's. They were someone else's. And so the mystery deepened. Was Megumi really dead, or was North Korea lying? Was she still alive somewhere in that closed country, still a prisoner, still waiting to go home? And her parents chose to believe she was alive. They had to believe it, because the alternative was unbearable. And so they did not move on. They kept Megumi's room exactly as it was. They kept her books and her clothes and her badminton racket. They waited for her to come home. And the years passed. 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. And then in the late 1990s, something impossible happened. Something that should have brought answers, but only brought more pain. The government of North Korea, the secretive dictatorship on the other side of the Sea of Japan, made an announcement. They admitted that they had kidnapped Japanese citizens in the 1970s and 80s. They said they had sent agents to Japan, agents who grabbed people off the streets and put them on boats and took them to North Korea, where they were used as teachers, forced to teach North Korean spies how to speak Japanese, how to act Japanese, how to pretend to be Japanese. And one of the people they admitted to kidnapping was Megumi Yokota. They said their agents had grabbed her near the beach on the night she disappeared, that she was 13 years old, that she had been alone, that they had put a bag over her head and carried her to a boat and taken her across the Sea of Japan to North Korea, and she had lived there for years, a prisoner in a foreign country, unable to contact her family, unable to go home. And North Korea said she had eventually married another Japanese abductee, that she had a daughter, that she had lived in North Korea until 1994 when she died. They said she had killed herself, that she had suffered from depression, that she was buried in North Korea. Megumi's parents were devastated. They had spent decades wondering if their daughter was alive, hoping she would come home, and now they were being told she had been alive all those years just across the sea, so close and yet completely unreachable, and now she was dead. But they did not believe North Korea's story. They did not believe she had killed herself. North Korea had lied about so many things. Why should this be different? And they demanded proof. They demanded to see her remains. And North Korea sent them bones. Bones they said were Megumi's. But when the bones were tested, the DNA did not match. The bones were not Megumi's. They were someone else's. And so the mystery deepened. Was Megumi really dead, or was North Korea lying? Was she still alive somewhere in that closed country, still a prisoner, still waiting to go home? and her parents chose to believe she was alive. They had to believe it, because the alternative was unbearable. And so they did not move on. They kept Megumi's room exactly as it was. They kept her books and her clothes and her badminton racket. They waited for her to come home. And the years passed. 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. And then in the late 1990s, something impossible happened. Something that should have brought answers, but only brought more pain. The government of North Korea, the secretive dictatorship on the other side of the Sea of Japan, made an announcement. They admitted that they had kidnapped Japanese citizens in the 1970s and 80s. They said they had sent agents to Japan, agents who grabbed people off the streets and put them on boats and took them to North Korea, where they were used as teachers, forced to teach North Korean spies how to speak Japanese, how to act Japanese, how to pretend to be Japanese. And one of the people they admitted to kidnapping was Megumi Yokota. They said their agents had grabbed her near the beach on the night she disappeared, that she was 13 years old, that she had been alone, that they had put a bag over her head and carried her to a boat and taken her across the Sea of Japan to North Korea, and she had lived there for years, a prisoner in a foreign country, unable to contact her family, unable to go home. And North Korea said she had eventually married another Japanese abductee, that she had a daughter, that she had lived in North Korea until 1994 when she died. They said she had killed herself, that she had suffered from depression, that she was buried in North Korea. Megumi's parents were devastated. Fire can destroy evidence faster than almost anything else. It turns flesh to ash, it melts metal, it reduces entire buildings to rubble, and when a house burns down and people are inside, we expect to find remains, bones at least, teeth, something, because fire hot enough to completely destroy human remains is rare. It requires extreme heat sustained for a long time, the kind of heat you find in a crematorium, not in a house fire. And so when a house in West Virginia burned down on Christmas Eve in 1945, and the family said 5 of their children were still inside, but no remains were ever found, people started asking questions, questions that have never been answered, questions that still haunt the family's descendants. The Sodder family lived in Fayetteville, West Virginia. George and Jenny Sodder and their 10 children. They were Italian immigrants. They worked hard. They had built a life in America. And on Christmas Eve 1945, the children were excited. It was Christmas. There were presents. There was joy. The children stayed up late. They played. They laughed. Finally, around midnight, everyone went to bed. George and Jenny fell asleep. The house was quiet, and then around 1 in the morning, Jenny woke to the smell of smoke. She shook George awake. The house was on fire. Flames were everywhere. They could hear the crackling. They could feel the heat. They ran to get the children. Marion was 17. She ran out. So did the younger children. But 5 of the children were upstairs. Maurice, who was 14. Martha, who was 12. Louis, who was 9. Jenny, who was 8. Betty, who was 5, and the fire was too intense. George tried to run upstairs, but the heat drove him back. He tried to find a ladder. The ladder that was always leaning against the side of the house was gone. It had been moved, hidden. George ran to his trucks. He would drive one close to the house and climb on top to reach the upstairs windows, but the trucks would not start. Both trucks that had been working fine the day before. Both dead. Jenny ran to the neighbor's house to call the fire department, but the phone did not work. The line was dead. Another neighbor had to drive to town to get help, and by the time the fire department arrived, hours had passed. The house had burned to the ground. There was nothing left but smoking rubble and ashes, and the 5 children were gone. The fire chief examined what was left of the house. He said the fire had burned very hot. He said the children's remains had been completely cremated. turned to ash. There was nothing to recover, nothing to bury, and the investigation was closed almost immediately. The cause of the fire was listed as faulty wiring, and within days a bulldozer came and pushed dirt over the ashes, covering everything. And George and Jenny Sodder were told to accept that their children were dead, to mourn and move on, but they could not accept it. They knew fire. George had worked with fire. He knew that even in the hottest fires there are always bones, fragments at least, teeth, something. And there had been no investigation, no careful search of the ashes. The site had been bulldozed over before anyone had really looked. And so they started asking questions. They started their own investigation. And the more they learned, the more convinced they became that their children had not died in that fire, that something else had happened, something darker. Strange things had happened before the fire. A few weeks earlier, George had been in an argument with a man about Mussolini. George had spoken out against the Italian dictator, and the man had gotten angry, had told George his house would burn, that his children would be destroyed. George had dismissed it as an angry threat, but now he wondered. And there were other things. The ladder had been moved and hidden. Why would anyone do that unless they wanted to make sure no one could reach the upstairs windows? The trucks had both failed to start at the exact moment they were needed. Was that coincidence or sabotage? The phone line had been cut. Not damaged by the fire, but cut before the fire. Someone had deliberately cut the line. And neighbors reported seeing a strange car parked near the house before the fire started. And one neighbor said he saw someone throw something at the house right before the flames appeared, something that looked like a firebomb. And the fire chief's conclusion that the children had been cremated made no sense. House fires do not burn hot enough to completely destroy bodies, not 5 bodies, not without any trace. And so George and Jenny began to believe that someone had set the fire deliberately, that in the chaos someone had taken their children, that the 5 children were not dead, but kidnapped. And over the next few years, they found evidence that supported this theory. A woman who ran a diner 50 miles away said she had seen the children the morning after the fire. They were with 2 men and 2 women. The children looked scared. They tried to speak to the woman, but the adults would not let them. They hurried the children away. And the woman did not think anything of it at the time, but later, when she saw the news about the fire, she realized who the children were. Another person said they had seen 4 of the children in a car with people who looked Italian, heading towards Charleston. Another claimed to have seen them in a motel. And then years later, a private investigator told George that he had found Lewis, that Lewis was alive and living in Florida, but the investigator wanted more money to reveal the location. George sent the money, but never heard from the investigator again. It was a scam, or maybe it was not. Maybe someone was trying to lead them away from the truth. And then in 1967, over 20 years after the fire, Jenny received a letter, no return address, postmarked from Kentucky. Inside was a photograph of a young man. On the back, someone had written, "Lewis Sodder, I love brother Frankie, I lil boys, A90132 or 35. The photograph showed a man in his 20s. He looked like Lewis might have looked if he had grown up. The resemblance was striking. Jenny was convinced it was her son. But who had sent it? Why had they sent it? What did the cryptic message mean? She tried to find out. She hired investigators, but the trail went nowhere. The photograph remains a mystery. George and Jenny Sodder spent the rest of their lives searching for their children. They put up a billboard along the highway with photographs of the 5 children and a reward for information. The billboard stayed up for decades. They gave interviews. They spoke to reporters. They never stopped believing their children were alive, that they had been taken and were being kept somewhere, maybe by people who wanted to hurt George because of his political views, maybe by some criminal organization, maybe for reasons they could not understand. and they never got answers. George died in 1969, still searching. Jenny died in 1989, still waiting. And the surviving Sodder children, now old themselves, still wonder what happened to their siblings. The case has never been solved. The 5 children, Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, and Betty, are still officially listed as missing, not dead, missing. And the questions remain. Did they die in the fire and somehow their remains were destroyed so completely that nothing was left? Or were they taken, kidnapped by someone who set the fire as a cover? And if they were taken, where did they go? Who took them? Are any of them still alive? Do they remember their family? Do they know who they are? And the most painful question of all, if they are alive, why have they never come home? The ocean appears again. Because the ocean is the greatest keeper of secrets. It covers more than 70% of the Earth. It is deep beyond imagining. It moves constantly, currents flowing, tides rising and falling, storms churning the surface. And beneath the surface is darkness and pressure and cold, and things that sink into the ocean are often never seen again. And in 1968, a submarine full of men disappeared into the Mediterranean Sea and was not found for more than 50 years. The submarine was called the Minerve. It was French, a diesel-electric submarine. Not the newest or most advanced, but reliable. It had been in service for 10 years. And on January 27, 1968, it was returning to its home port of Toulon in southern France after completing training exercises off the coast of Corsica. On board were 52 men, sailors, officers, mechanics, young men in their 20s and 30s, men with families waiting for them, men who were looking forward to being home. And the submarine was on the surface sending routine radio messages to the base. Everything was normal, everything was fine. The last message was sent at 7:55 in the morning. The commander reported their position. He said they were about to dive. He said they would surface again in a few hours when they were closer to Toulon. And then the submarine submerged and was never heard from again. When the submarine did not arrive at the expected time, the base tried to make radio contact. There was no response. They tried again and again. Still nothing. And as the hours passed, it became clear that something was very wrong. The submarine should have surfaced. It should have radioed. Where was it? What had happened? And the French Navy launched a massive search. Ships were sent to the area where the submarine had last reported its position. Planes flew overhead. Sonar was used to scan the ocean floor. And other countries sent help. The United States sent ships. Italy sent ships. Everyone was searching for the Minerve, searching for 52 men. But the Mediterranean Sea is deep. In some places, it is 5,000 meters deep, more than 3 miles. And sonar in 1968 was not as advanced as it is now, and the searchers found nothing. No wreckage, no debris, no oil slick, no signal from the submarine's emergency beacon, just empty water. And after weeks of searching, the French Navy had to accept the worst. The Minerve was lost. The 52 men aboard were dead. But no one knew what had happened. No one knew where the submarine was, and so the families were left with no answers, no closure, no bodies to bury, just the terrible knowledge that their loved ones had gone down into the sea and were still there somewhere, lost. Theories were proposed. Maybe there had been a mechanical failure, something that caused the submarine to flood, water rushing in so fast the crew had no time to react, no time to send a distress signal. Or maybe the submarine had gone too deep, deeper than it was designed to go, and the pressure had crushed the hull, collapsing it in an instant, killing everyone inside before they even knew what was happening. Or maybe there had been a collision, another ship, an underwater object, something that damaged the submarine and sent it to the bottom. But without wreckage, without evidence, these were just guesses, just ways to try to make sense of something that made no sense. And the families had to live with that. 52 families wondering what had happened in those last moments, whether their sons and husbands and fathers had suffered, whether they had been afraid, whether they had known they were going to die, or whether it had been so sudden there was no time for anything at all. The French government declared the men dead. Memorials were held, names were carved into monuments, but the submarine was still out there somewhere, still sitting on the bottom of the sea, still holding the bodies of 52 men, and the families wanted it found. They wanted to know where their loved ones were. And so the search continued, not continuously, but periodically. Whenever new technology became available, whenever there was funding, search teams would go back to the Mediterranean and look for the Minerve. And in 2019, after 51 years, they finally found it. A deep-sea search vessel equipped with advanced sonar located the wreckage. It was sitting in 2,400 meters of water off the coast of Toulon. The hull was broken. The submarine had clearly been through some catastrophic event. And the families finally had an answer to one question. They knew where the Minerve was. But they still did not know what had happened. The wreckage could not tell them. There was no black box, no recording of the final moments. And so the mystery remained. 52 men went down into the sea, and the sea kept them. And even when we found the place where they died, we still did not know how or why. And we will never know, because the men who could tell us are gone, and the submarine is too deep to recover, and the ocean keeps its secrets. In the wilderness, people disappear in ways that seem impossible. You would think that in the modern world, with helicopters and search dogs and thermal imaging and GPS, you would think that no one could just vanish, especially not a child, especially not in a place where hundreds of people are searching. But it happens. It happens more often than most people realize. And one of the most disturbing cases happened in 1969 in the Great Smoky Mountains, when a 6-year-old boy was playing with his brother and cousins, and in the space of a few minutes, he was gone and has never been found. His name was Dennis Martin. He was 6 years old, small for his age. He had blonde hair and he was wearing a red t-shirt. And on June 14, 1969, his family was camping in the mountains. It was Father's Day. The weather was beautiful, warm, and clear. The family had hiked to a place called Spence Field, a grassy area surrounded by forest, a popular spot for camping. There were other families there, other children playing, and Dennis was playing hide-and-seek with his brother and some other boys. They were hiding behind bushes, trying to scare their parents. It was a game. It was fun. Dennis ran off to hide behind some bushes about 30 yards away. The other boys saw him go. He was laughing. And then they lost sight of him for just a moment, just seconds. And when they looked again, he was gone. They called his name, they thought he was still hiding, but he did not answer, and the boys went to where they had seen him go, and he was not there, and they started to get worried. They called louder, they looked around, and then they told the adults, and Dennis's father started searching, calling his son's name, running through the woods, looking behind trees and rocks, and other campers joined, and within minutes dozens of people were searching. And within an hour, park rangers had been called, and an official search had begun. And by the end of the day, hundreds of people were looking for Dennis Martin. The search became one of the largest in the history of the National Park Service. Over 1,400 people participated: volunteers, military personnel, park rangers, FBI agents. They used search dogs, they used helicopters, they covered more than 50 square miles of terrain. They looked for days. They called Dennis's name over and over. They checked every trail, every ravine, every creek, every possible place a 6-year-old boy could be. And they found nothing. No trace, no clothing, no footprints, no sign that Dennis had ever been there. And it made no sense. He had only been out of sight for a minute, maybe less. How far could a 6-year-old go in 1 minute? Not far. But the search area kept expanding because they were not finding him, and the terrain was difficult. The mountains were steep, the forest was thick with undergrowth, visibility was low. You could walk past someone lying on the ground and not see them. And so they kept searching, hoping that Dennis had fallen and was hurt and could not call out, hoping that he was hiding and scared, hoping that he was still alive. But days passed, and the hope faded, and after a week the official search was scaled back. They had looked everywhere, they had found nothing, and the likelihood that a 6-year-old could survive a week in the mountains without food or water or shelter was almost zero. And so the search teams left. But Dennis's father did not leave. He stayed in the mountains, searching. He called his son's name until his voice was gone. He walked the trails until he could barely stand. And he never stopped believing that Dennis was out there somewhere, waiting to be found. But Dennis was never found. No remains, no clothing, no evidence, nothing. He is still listed as a missing person, still out there somewhere in the Smoky Mountains, and his father searched until he died, never knowing what happened to his son. The theories are painful to consider. Maybe Dennis got turned around in the forest. Maybe he walked in the wrong direction, away from the searchers instead of toward them. Maybe he fell into a ravine or a creek and was swept away or covered by debris. Maybe an animal took him. There are bears in those mountains, black bears that usually avoid humans but sometimes attack, especially if they feel threatened or if they are hungry. But bears usually leave evidence, and the search dogs should have picked up a scent, and the dogs found nothing. They could not track Dennis at all. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. And some people have suggested something darker, that Dennis was taken by a person, that someone was in the woods that day and saw an opportunity, a small child alone for just a moment, and took him. But there was no evidence of that either. No reports of suspicious people, no vehicles seen leaving the area, nothing. And so the mystery remains. A 6-year-old boy disappeared in broad daylight in a place surrounded by people and was never seen again. And the forest keeps the secret. Somewhere in those mountains there is an answer. Maybe scattered bones, maybe remains that have been covered by years of leaves and growth, maybe nothing at all. But whatever the answer is, the forest is not telling. And Dennis Martin's father died without knowing, and his mother died without knowing, and his brother lives with the memory of that day, the memory of playing hide and seek, the memory of the moment Dennis ran behind the bushes, the last time anyone saw him, and the terrible weight of wondering if there was something he could have done, something he should have noticed, some way he could have prevented what happened. But he was a child himself. He was playing a game, and no one could have known that in the space of a minute, his brother would be gone forever.
History is written by the people who survive, by the people who have the power to record events, and sometimes people who were important, people who changed the world, simply disappear from the records. One day they are mentioned, the next day they are not, and we are left wondering what happened to them, where they went, how they died. And one of the most powerful women in ancient history vanished from the historical record in a way that has puzzled scholars for centuries. Her name was Zenobia. She was the queen of Palmyra, a city in what is now Syria, and in the 3rd century she built an empire. She conquered Egypt. She conquered parts of Asia Minor. She challenged Rome itself. She was called the warrior queen, and for a time she ruled over a vast territory. She minted coins with her face on them. She declared herself Augusta, empress, and she seemed unstoppable. But then Rome sent an army, Emperor Aurelian led his legions into her territory and defeated her forces in battle after battle, and in the year 272, Palmyra fell, and Zenobia was captured, and that is where the mystery begins, because what happened to Zenobia after her capture is unclear. The historical sources contradict each other. Some say she was taken to Rome in chains, paraded through the streets as a prisoner in Aurelian's triumph, displayed to the Roman people as a symbol of Rome's power, and then some sources say she was released, that she lived out her life in a villa near Rome, that she married a Roman senator, that she had children, that she died peacefully. But other sources say she died on the journey to Rome, that she refused to eat, that she starved herself rather than be humiliated, that she died with dignity. And still other sources say she was executed, that Aurelian had her beheaded, or that she was killed by her captors. And we do not know which version is true. We have no grave, no monument, no clear record of her death. Zenobia simply disappears from history, one of the most powerful women of her time, a woman who commanded armies and ruled an empire, and we do not know how her story ends. The records are silent, and the silence has lasted for more than 1,700 years. And Zenobia is not the only one. There are others, people who were famous or powerful or important, and then they just vanish from the historical record. There was Raoul Wallenberg, a Swedish diplomat who saved thousands of Jews during World War II. He issued protective passports, he sheltered people, he risked his life to fight against the Holocaust. And then in 1945, the Soviet army arrived in Budapest, and Raoul Wallenberg was taken into custody. The Soviets said they wanted to protect him. They said he would be safe. And then he disappeared. The Soviet government said he had died in prison in 1947. They said he had a heart attack. But there were reports of people seeing him in Soviet prisons in the 1950s, in the 1960s, reports of a Swedish prisoner who was being held in isolation, who was not allowed contact with the outside world, and his family demanded answers. The Swedish government demanded answers, but the Soviet Union gave no clear answers. The records were classified, the truth was hidden, and Raoul Wallenberg disappeared into the Soviet prison system and was never seen again. A man who saved thousands of lives, who should have been celebrated as a hero, and he died alone in a prison cell. Or maybe he did not die in 1947. Maybe he lived for years longer, suffering in isolation, and we will never know because the records are still secret. The truth is still hidden. There was Amelia Earhart's navigator, Fred Noonan, lost with her over the Pacific. There was Michael Rockefeller, the son of the wealthy Rockefeller family, who disappeared in New Guinea in 1961 while studying indigenous tribes. He was 23 years old. His boat capsized, he tried to swim to shore, and he was never seen again. Some say he drowned, some say he was killed by tribesmen, some say he survived and lived with the tribe for years, but no one knows. There was Jimmy Hoffa, the American labor union leader who disappeared in 1975. He went to a meeting and never came back. His body has never been found. There have been theories. He was killed by the mafia. He was buried in concrete. He was cremated. He was dumped in a river. But despite decades of investigation and numerous searches, his body has never been found. And there was D.B. Cooper, the man who hijacked a plane in 1971, demanded ransom money, and then jumped out of the plane over the forests of Washington state and was never seen again. The FBI searched for him for decades. They found some of the ransom money years later buried in the sand near a river, but they never found him, dead or alive, and the case remains unsolved. These are just some of the names. There are hundreds more, thousands more, people who walked into a moment and did not walk out,
people who left behind families and questions and unfinished stories. And we tell ourselves that in the modern world this does not happen anymore, that we have cameras everywhere, that we have satellites and cell phones and tracking devices, that people cannot just vanish. But they do. Every year, thousands of people disappear. Some of them are found, alive or dead, but many are not. They join the list of the missing, the names in databases, the faces on posters, the people who are gone but not forgotten, and their families live in a kind of limbo, unable to mourn, unable to move on, because how do you mourn someone when you don't know if they are dead? How do you let go when there is no proof, no body, no grave? And so they wait, and they search, and they hope, even when hope seems irrational, even when logic says there is no chance. They hope because hope is all they have left. There is a place in the Atlantic Ocean that has become famous for disappearances, a triangular area of water between Florida, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico, and for decades ships and planes have vanished there in ways that seem to defy explanation. Some people call it cursed, some call it a mystery, scientists call it a coincidence, but the disappearances are real. The people are real, and the families left behind are real. And whether there is something strange about that patch of ocean, or whether it's just bad luck and human error, the fact remains that people have vanished there and have never been found. In December 1945, 5 Navy bombers took off from Fort Lauderdale, Florida, on a routine training mission. The planes were Avenger torpedo bombers, large and sturdy. The pilots were experienced. The weather was good. They were supposed to fly east over the ocean, practice bombing runs, and then fly back. A simple flight. But something went wrong. About an hour and a half into the flight leader radioed the base. His voice was confused. He said his compass was malfunctioning. He said he didn't know which way was west. He said everything looked wrong. The other pilots confirmed it. Their compasses were not working either. They were lost. The base tried to guide them. They told them to fly west toward the sun, toward the coast, but the flight leader seemed disoriented. His messages became more erratic. He said they were over land, but that didn't make sense. They should have been over water. And then the radio transmissions became garbled, harder to understand, and then they stopped. The 5 planes disappeared. 14 men gone, and the Navy launched a search. They sent ships, they sent planes. One of the search planes was a Martin Mariner, a large seaplane with a crew of 13, and the Martin Mariner took off and flew toward the area where the bombers were last heard from. And then the Martin Mariner disappeared too. It sent no distress signal. It simply vanished. And now 6 planes were missing. 27 men gone, and the Navy searched for weeks. They covered thousands of square miles of ocean, and they found nothing. No wreckage, no debris, no life rafts, no bodies, nothing. And the disappearance became one of the most famous mysteries of the Bermuda Triangle. Over the years, more ships and planes disappeared in that area. The USS Cyclops, a massive Navy cargo ship with 309 people on board, vanished in 1918. It sailed from Barbados and was never seen again. No distress signal, no wreckage, just gone. It remains the single largest loss of life in the history of the U.S. Navy not related to combat. And there was the Star Tiger, a passenger plane that disappeared in 1948 while flying from the Azores to Bermuda. It sent a routine message saying everything was fine, and then it vanished. 25 passengers and 6 crew gone. And there was the Douglas DC-3, another passenger plane, disappeared in 1948 with 32 people on board. And the list goes on. the Sandra, a cargo ship that disappeared in 1950, the Connemara 4, a yacht that vanished in 1956, and many others, some with distress signals, some without, some in bad weather, some in clear skies, and people started to wonder if there was something about that part of the ocean, something strange, something dangerous, something that caused instruments to fail and ships to sink and planes to crash. And the theories multiplied. Some said there were magnetic anomalies in the area, unusual magnetic fields that could cause compasses to malfunction, that could disorient pilots. Some said there were large pockets of methane gas trapped under the ocean floor, and when the gas was released, it rose to the surface in bubbles, and the bubbles could sink a ship by reducing the density of the water, and a plane flying through a cloud of methane could have its engines fail. And some said there were rogue waves, giant waves that appeared without warning and could capsize even large ships. And then there were the stranger theories, UFOs, alien abductions, portals to other dimensions, the lost city of Atlantis causing disturbances. And these theories were dismissed by scientists, but they persisted in popular culture. The Bermuda Triangle became a legend, a place of mystery and danger. But scientists say there is nothing special about the Bermuda Triangle. They say it is a heavily traveled area of ocean. Thousands of ships and planes pass through it every year, and statistically, some of them are going to have accidents. And they say that the number of disappearances in the Bermuda Triangle is not higher than in any other comparable area of ocean, that it is confirmation bias. People remember the disappearances that happen there and forget about the ones that happen elsewhere. And they say that most of the disappearances have logical explanations. Bad weather, human error, mechanical failure. The ocean is dangerous, planes crash, ships sink, and when they sink in deep water, they are often never found. And the Bermuda Triangle includes some of the deepest water in the Atlantic, the Puerto Rico Trench, which goes down more than 8,000 meters, deeper than Mount Everest is tall. And anything that sinks into that trench is gone forever. And so the scientists say there is no mystery, just tragedy, just the normal dangers of the ocean. But the families of the people who disappeared do not care about statistics. They do not care about explanations. They care about the people they lost, the fathers and sons and brothers and husbands and wives who went out on the water and never came back. And whether the Bermuda Triangle is cursed or not, whether there is something strange there or not, the fact remains that people have disappeared there, real people with real lives, and they are still missing, still out there somewhere in the dark water or on the ocean floor or scattered across the sand, and their families are still waiting for answers that will probably never come. Sometimes a person disappears from a place that should be the safest place of all, from their own home, from their own bed, surrounded by family. And when that happens, the horror is multiplied, because if you are not safe at home, then where are you safe? And there was a case in Australia in 1966 when 3 children vanished from a beach while their parents watched from nearby. And the disappearance was so strange, so inexplicable, that people still argue about what happened. It was Australia Day, January 26, 1966. The Beaumont family went to Glenelg Beach near Adelaide. It was a hot summer day. The beach was crowded. The Beaumont children, Jane, who was 9, Arna, who was 7, and Grant, who was 4, they were playing in the sand, swimming in the waves. Their mother Nancy was with them at first, but then she went home to get lunch ready. She thought the children would be fine. They knew the beach, they had been there many times, and there were hundreds of people around. And the children were supposed to come home by 2 o'clock. But 2 o'clock came and they did not arrive. Nancy waited. She thought maybe they had lost track of time, but when it got to 3 o'clock and they still weren't home, she started to worry. She went back to the beach looking for them, and they were not there. She asked people if they had seen 3 children, a girl in a yellow bathing suit, another girl in a blue bathing suit, a little boy in shorts. And people said they had seen children matching that description earlier. They had seen them playing. They had seen them with a man, a tall, blond man. The children seemed to be comfortable with him. They were playing with him, throwing a ball. And then later, someone saw the children walking toward the parking lot with the man. And after that, no one saw them again. Nancy called the police. The police searched the beach. They searched the area. They questioned people. They got descriptions of the man, tall, blond, mid-30s, wearing swim trunks. And they put out alerts. And the search grew. Volunteers searched the dunes, the parks, the streets. And as the hours passed and the children were not found, the fear grew. Where were they? Who was the man? What had happened? And the police investigation became one of the largest in Australian history. They interviewed thousands of people. They followed hundreds of leads. And they found nothing. The Beaumont children had vanished. 3 children in broad daylight from a crowded beach, and no one knew where they had gone. The theories were all dark. The most likely explanation was that the children had been abducted by the man people saw them with, that he had lured them away with promises of treats or games, that he had taken them somewhere and killed them. But without bodies, without evidence, the police could not prove it. They had suspects over the years, men who seemed suspicious, men who had been in the area that day, men who had a history of violence, but none of them could be conclusively linked to the disappearance. And as the years passed, the case went cold. The Beaumont children were never found. Their parents spent the rest of their lives waiting, hoping, searching. Nancy Beaumont answered every phone call thinking it might be news of her children. Jim Beaumont followed every lead no matter how unlikely, and they never gave up, never accepted that their children were dead. Because without bodies, how could they accept it? And they died without knowing, without answers, and the Beaumont children remain missing. 3 names on a list, 3 faces on old posters. 3 children who walked off a beach and were never seen again. And Australia has never forgotten them. The case has haunted the country for more than 50 years. It changed how parents watched their children. It made people afraid. And it remains unsolved, a mystery that will probably never be answered. And somewhere, maybe buried in the Australian bush, maybe scattered in the ocean, maybe hidden in a place no one has thought to look, are the remains of Jane, Arna, and Grant Beaumont. 3 children who deserved to grow up, who deserved to live, who were stolen from the world. And we will never know what happened to them. We will never know what they felt in those last moments, whether they were scared, whether they called for their parents, whether they understood what was happening. And the not knowing is a torture that their family carried for the rest of their lives. The world is full of places where people disappear more often than they should, places that seem to have a hunger for human life. And one of those places is the wilderness, the deep forests, the high mountains, the remote deserts, places where nature is in control and humans are just visitors, fragile and lost. And in the national parks of the United States, places that millions of people visit every year for their beauty and peace, people disappear with disturbing regularity. They walk into the trees and they do not come back. And the numbers are higher than most people realize, and the patterns are strange, unsettling, hard to explain. There is no central database of disappearances in national parks. The Park Service does not keep comprehensive records, at least not publicly. But researchers who have studied the cases have found hundreds of disappearances, maybe more than 1,000. People who went missing in parks and were never found. And the cases have similarities. Children disappear more often than adults. Experienced hikers disappear from trails they know. People vanish in areas that have been thoroughly searched. And when bodies are found, if they are found, they are often in places that do not make sense.
places far from where the person was last seen, places that search teams already looked. And the causes of death are often unclear, and search dogs often cannot find a scent even when they are brought to the location within hours of the disappearance. And this has led some people to wonder if there is something else going on, something beyond just getting lost or injured. But what that something is, no one can say. There was Keith Parkins, an experienced outdoorsman who disappeared in 1952 while elk hunting in the Cascade Mountains in Washington. He knew the area well. He was careful. He was with a group. They split up to cover more ground, and Keith was supposed to meet them at a certain place at a certain time, but he never showed up. His friends searched for him. They called the authorities. Search teams came. They searched for days, and they found nothing. No sign of Keith, no tracks, no evidence. And then months later, his body was found miles away from where he had been hunting, in an area that had been searched. His rifle was found nearby. There was no clear cause of death. It was as if he had just laid down and died. But why would an experienced hunter do that? And how did he end up so far from where he was last seen? And why did the search teams not find him the first time? There was Trenny Lynn Gibson, a 16-year-old girl who disappeared in 1976 while on a field trip in the Great Smoky Mountains in Georgia. She was with her class. They were hiking. She walked ahead of the group to take photographs. She was last seen by a classmate, and then minutes later, when the group reached the spot where she should have been, she was gone. They searched immediately. Hundreds of people searched for weeks, and they found nothing. No trace of Trenny, no clothing, no camera, no sign that she had ever been there. She is still missing more than 40 years later, and her family still does not know what happened. There was Jared Ottadero, a 3-year-old boy who disappeared in 1999 while on a hiking trip with a Christian singles group in the Rocky Mountains in Colorado. Jared was walking with the group. He was excited, he was happy, and at some point he walked ahead. The adults lost sight of him for a few minutes, and when they realized he was not with them anymore, they went back looking for him, calling his name. And he was gone. The mass was massive, one of the largest in Colorado history. Volunteers, dogs, helicopters, they searched for months, and they found nothing. And then 4 years later, some of Jared's clothes were found on a mountain, miles from where he had disappeared. The clothes were arranged carefully, not scattered, and there were animal tooth marks on them. And people assumed Jared had been killed by a mountain lion, but his father never believed it. The clothes were too far away, they were too neatly arranged, and Jared's shoes were found, but they were not damaged. How could a mountain lion carry a child that far and not damage his shoes? And so the mystery remained. And Jared's father spent years searching, investigating, demanding answers, and he never got them. These are just a few of the cases. There are so many more. People of all ages, all levels of experience, disappearing in national parks in ways that do not make sense. And some people have suggested that there is something about the wilderness, something we do not understand, something that takes people. But what could that be? Are there predators we do not know about? Are there people living in the forests, hermits or criminals who prey on hikers? Or is it something else, something stranger? Or is it just the wilderness being the wilderness, unforgiving and vast and indifferent, a place where a person can take one wrong step and fall into a ravine, where a person can get disoriented and walk in circles until they collapse, where nature erases evidence quickly, where bodies decompose and are scattered by animals, where the trees are so thick and the terrain so rough that searchers can walk right past someone and never see them. And maybe that is the answer. Maybe there is no mystery, just tragedy, just the cruel reality that the wilderness is not safe, that we are fragile, that we can be lost so easily. But still, the patterns are strange, the similarities are unsettling, and the families of the missing are left with questions that have no answers, and they wait, and they hope, and they search, and most of them never find what they are looking for. The disappeared are everywhere. In every country, in every time period, in every culture. They are the explorers who sailed into unknown waters and never returned. They are the children who walked to school and never arrived. They are the soldiers who went to war and were never accounted for. They are the people who went for a walk and did not come home. They are the ones whose names we remember and the ones whose names have been forgotten. And they are united by one thing. They stepped into a moment, and the moment erased them, and we are left behind wondering where they went, what happened, why there is no trace, no evidence, no answer. And the wondering never stops. It echoes through the years, through generations. It becomes part of history, part of legend, part of the questions we ask about the world, about fate, about how fragile we are.
What does it mean to disappear, truly disappear, to leave no trace, no body, no evidence, no proof that you ever existed except in the memories of the people who loved you? And what happens to those memories when everyone who knew you is gone? Do you disappear again, completely this time, erased from existence? Or do you live on in stories, in mysteries, in the questions that people still ask? And is that a kind of immortality? A dark immortality, to be remembered not for what you did, but for how you vanished, to be a name on a list of the missing, a face on a poster, a case that was never solved. The families of the disappeared live in a kind of hell. They cannot grieve properly because grief requires an ending, a body, a funeral, a grave, something to mark the fact that the person is gone. But when someone disappears, there is no ending. There is only absence, only the terrible waiting. And some families wait for decades. They wait their entire lives, and they die still waiting, still hoping, still believing that somehow, someday, the person they love will come home. And that hope is both a blessing and a curse. It keeps them going. It gives them a reason to get up every day. But it also prevents them from moving on, from accepting, from finding peace. And so they are trapped, suspended between hope and despair, and there is no escape except death. There is something about disappearance that haunts us more than death. Death is final. Death has rituals. Death has meaning. We understand death, even if we fear it. But disappearance is different. Disappearance is liminal. It is neither life nor death. It is existence in question, and we are not equipped to deal with that. Our minds need closure. We need answers. We need to know what happened. And when we do not know, when we cannot know, it breaks something in us, and that brokenness is passed down. Children grow up knowing that their sibling disappeared, that their parent never stopped searching, that there is a hole in the family that can never be filled, and they carry that weight, and they pass it to their own children, and the disappearance becomes part of the family story, part of the identity, a wound that never heals. And what of the disappeared themselves? If they could speak, if they could tell us what happened in those final moments, what would they say? Would Amelia Earhart tell us that she fought the ocean as her plane went down, that she tried to swim, that she called for help into the empty sky? Or would she tell us it was quick, that the water was cold and dark, and then there was nothing? Would the sailors of the Franklin expedition tell us about the cold, about the hunger, about the fear, about the slow realization that they were not going to survive, that no one was coming to save them? Would they tell us about the moment hope died? Or would they tell us that they fought until the end, that they never gave up, that they died with dignity, even in the frozen hell of the Arctic? Would Harold Holt tell us that he knew he was in trouble the moment the current grabbed him, that he tried to swim back but the ocean was too strong, that he went under and the water filled his lungs and there was pain and then there was nothing? Or would he tell us it was peaceful, that drowning is not as terrible as we think, that there is a moment when the body stops fighting and accepts, and there is a kind of peace? Would Megumi Yokota tell us about the terror of being grabbed, of being put in a boat, of being taken to a strange country, of the years of imprisonment, of the longing for her family, of the despair? Or would she tell us that she survived, that she found a way to live, that she made the best of an impossible situation? Would the Sodder children tell us that they died in the fire, that it was fast, that they did not suffer? Or would they tell us that they were taken, that they were scared, that they called for their parents, that they never understood why this was happening to them? Would Dennis Martin tell us that he got lost, that he walked and could not find his way back, that he was cold and hungry and alone, that he called for his father until his voice was gone? Or would he tell us something else, something we cannot imagine, something that would make the mystery even deeper? We will never know. The disappeared cannot speak. They left no messages, no journals, no final words. They just left, and we are left to imagine, to guess, to create stories that might be true or might not be. And the stories we create say as much about us as they do about the disappeared. They reveal our fears, our need for answers, our refusal to accept that sometimes there are no answers, that sometimes people just vanish and the world does not care, that the universe is not obligated to make sense to us, that we are small and fragile, and the forces that shape the world, the ocean, the cold, the wilderness, the cruelty of other humans, those forces are so much larger than us, and they can erase us in a moment, and there will be no explanation, no justice, no meaning, just absence, just silence, just the space where we used to be. And yet we keep searching, we keep asking, we keep refusing to accept the silence, because that is what it means to be human, to push against the darkness, to demand answers even when there are none, to search for the missing even when the search seems hopeless, to remember the disappeared even when everyone else has forgotten. And maybe that is enough. Maybe the searching itself is the answer, not the closure, but the refusal to stop looking, not the closure, but the determination to keep the questions alive, because as long as we are asking, as long as we are searching, as long as we are remembering, the disappeared are not truly gone. They are still here, in the spaces between the words, in the questions we cannot stop asking, in the mysteries that will never be solved. The sun is setting somewhere right now, casting long shadows across the water, across the mountains, across the forests, and somewhere a person is taking a step that will be their last. They do not know it yet. They think they are just going for a swim, just going for a hike, just walking home. They think they will be back soon. They think tomorrow will come and they will still be here. But tomorrow will come, and they will be gone, and the people who love them will search, they will call their name, they will refuse to believe, they will hope against hope, and the world will keep turning, the sun will keep rising, the seasons will change, and the disappeared will remain disappeared, and we will add another name to the list, another face to the wall, another mystery to the collection of mysteries, another question that will never be answered. Where did they go? That is the question, the only question. Where did they go when they stepped into the fog, when they flew into the sky, when they walked into the trees, when they swam into the ocean, when they vanished from the street? Where did they go? And the world does not answer. The fog does not part. The sky remains empty. The trees stand silent. The ocean keeps rolling. The street is just a street, and the disappeared are gone. And we are here, still searching, still hoping, still asking. Where did they go? Where did they go? Where did they go? And the silence stretches on forever. And we are left standing at the edge of the mystery, looking into the darkness, knowing we will never see what is there, knowing the answer is beyond our reach, knowing that some questions will never be answered, some people will never be found, some mysteries will never be solved, and we have to live with that. We have to carry that weight. We have to accept that the world is stranger and crueler and more mysterious than we want to believe, and that people can disappear, really disappear, without a trace, without a reason, without an ending, and all we can do is remember them, speak their names, tell their stories, and keep the questions alive, because if we stop asking, if we forget, then they truly are gone. Then the silence wins. Then the disappeared disappear forever. And we cannot let that happen. We will not let that happen. And so we keep searching, we keep asking, we keep hoping, even though hope is irrational, even though logic says there is nothing left to find. We keep going, because that is what love does. Love refuses to give up. Love refuses to forget. Love refuses to accept the silence. And love is all we have. Love and memory, and the questions that will never be answered. And maybe that is enough. Maybe it has to be enough, because it is all there is. Where did they go? The question hangs in the air, unanswered, unanswerable, eternal, and the darkness does not respond, and the silence does not break, and we are left here in the space between knowing and not knowing, between hope and despair, between remembering and forgetting. And that is where the disappeared live now, in that space, in the questions we ask, in the searches that never end, in the love that refuses to die. And as long as we are here, as long as we are asking, they are not truly gone. They are somewhere between the worlds, between the living and the dead, between the found and the lost. And they are waiting, waiting for us to find them, waiting for us to answer the question, waiting for the silence to break. But the silence does not break, and we wait with them, and we search with them, and we remember them. And that is all we can do. Remember and wonder and ask. Where did they go? Where did they go? Where did they go? The world keeps turning, but the disappeared do not return. Their names fade, their faces blur, and still we do not know where they went. Time moves forward, but the questions stay behind, waiting in the silence. We search through history, through oceans and mountains and empty streets, and we found no answers, only more mystery. On echoed reality, some questions are left open, because they are still waiting for answers. Maybe one day the silence will break. Maybe one day someone will find what was lost. Or maybe the disappeared will stay gone forever, and all we will ever have are the echoes they left behind. But here is what we cannot forget. If they vanished so completely, without a trace, without a sound, how many others are disappearing right now, and we just do not see it yet?